It's this one. Can you see my screen right now?
I saw which one it was. It's page 11.
Okay.
I don't see it now, though. All right, there we go.
Yeah, is that so? But you do see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So, what's the difference between a latch and a flip flop?
That is a flip flop.
And also, what's the difference between a latch and a gated latch? So, this one is, I don't remember, did I say? It says the following basic RS latch. So, it is not a gated latch. And so, the difference between a latch and a flip flop, were you about to tell me?
I don't think I have a good answer.
Okay, so the difference between a latch and a flip-flop is a latch can change its value anytime, whereas a flip-flop changes its value only on a clock edge, only on a positive clock edge or a negative clock edge, depending on the type of flip-flop. Now, a latch can be gated. A gated latch means it can change its value when the clock is high, but not when the clock is low. And so the clock signal alternates between high and low. But this is an SR latch, so it means that the output changes whenever the input changes. And the way an SR latch works, and I have to look this up every time. So the way an SR latch works is if S and R are both 0, then you have no change in your output. Whatever your output is, it stays the same. Oh, I don't have to look it up for SR. I know what SR is. It's JK I have to look up. Okay, and 0, 1 means the 1 for R means reset. So that means your value, your Q output is going to be 0. If you have 1, 0, the S stands for set, and so your Q output will be 1. And if you have 1, 1, we try to avoid that for an SR latch because it can give unstable values. So when I'm looking at my output here, I want to look and see what happens. Right now, I have Q is starting at, did I say in the handout if Q is starting at 0 or 1?
Doesn't say.
Okay, I'm going to say that Q is starting at 0, and so that'd be Q bar starting at 1. Okay, so when I get to where R it becomes 1, that's reset, so Q will be 0. And then I get to where S is 1, and that's a set, so Q becomes 1. And then I get to where S and R are both 0. Both 0 means no change, so it stays at 1. And then R becomes 1, and when R is 1, that's 0. And it stays 0 until S becomes 1. And then there's no change. And then S is 1 again, well, that's still going to be 1. And then we get to R being 1, and then R becomes 0. And then they're both 0, so that's no change. And then Q bar is just going to be the opposite.
Would he ever give us a timing diagram of an SR latch like he would have that 1-1 situation on?
He wouldn't. Where's my worksheet? There's my worksheet. Okay, so now let's take a look at let's do this one, but this time we're going to say it's a gated latch. And it's a very strange clock to me that the signal is high for less time than it is that it's low. But a gated latch means it can only change while the clock is at 1. And so it'll stay wherever it is when the clock is at 0. So it's at 0, so it'll stay at 0. And then when the clock becomes 1, it'll look at the values. S is 1 and R is 0. That's a set. So it's at 1 during this time period. But then when the clock is 0, it can't change. So it's going to stay at 1 all the way till we get to the next time that the clock is 1. The next time the clock is 1, R is 1 and S is 0. And so that's a reset. So it'll come down to 0. And then it'll stay at 0 until the next time the clock is 1. And here where the clock is 1, they're both 0, so that's no change. So it'll stay at 0 until the next time the clock is 1. Next time the clock is 1, S is 1 and R is 0, so that'll be a set. So it becomes 1, and it stays 1. And then Q bar does the opposite.
Reset changes to Q to 0?
Where?
No, I was just asking. I'm sorry. If R is 1 and S is 0.
Yes. So R equal to 1, S equals to 0 means Q becomes 0.
Okay.
Yeah. So our truth table has when they're both 0, it's no change. R1 and S0, it's 0. R0, S1 is 1. And both 1, we try to avoid that.
Is there an easy way to remember?
Yeah.
Like
R is reset. R is reset. So when R is 1, it goes to 0. And S is set. So when S is 1, it goes to 1. Was that your question?
Oh, no. Just how to identify, like, it's just sort of, for me, it's still arbitrary why reset is 0 and set is 1.
Oh, yeah. No, I don't have any help for you there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
But that's why it's good to have the notes for the test.
Yes. Okay, now a D latch, D has you can remember D as Q follows D. So Q does whatever D does. And it's a gated D latch, which means that Q can only change when the clock is high. But this one is backwards. It's saying plot the D input of a gated D latch that generates the Q output shown below. So you have to say what D would make that Q. And in order to do this, I'm going to draw some vertical lines that show me where the clock is high, because Q can only change where the clock is high. So I'm going to draw some vertical lines to show me that. Now, there's not one answer to this, because D can do whatever it wants when the clock is low, and that won't affect the Q output. Since it's gated, the Q output can only change when the clock is high. So you can have it do whatever you want when the clock is low. But Q follows D, so whenever the clock is high, which will be here, 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 here. Show up very well. So these are the areas where the clock is high. So these are the areas where the Q output can change. You'll notice during the not highlighted areas, it never changes because it can't change when the clock is not high. So D can do whatever it wants while the clock is low, but I'm not gonna go crazy and have it do stuff. But while the clock is high, the output has to be whatever the same as the input is. So since I'm going backwards, that means my input needs to be the same as the output because I know the output followed my input. Now, if I wanted to, I could be all crazy here and do that because that doesn't affect anything. But if I wanted to be, just extra super safe, I can just follow this graph. Oh, I'm going to be crazy again. Couldn't help it. There we go. Okay, so that is a D input that could have generated that Q output. But that was a latch. Now let's take a look at this one. Which is asking us, we've got three different things here. We have a gated D latch. We know it's gated because it has the clock on it. We have a positive edge triggered flip-flop. We know that because of the triangle. And we have a negative edge triggered flip-flop, and we know that because of the triangle with the bubble on it. So I'm going to draw vertical lines at the clock edges because I need to know where the clock edges are to do this. And I'll start with the gated D latch. And so it's going to be similar to what we just saw. We know it can only change when the clock is high. And it says assume that Q is initially 0. So this is QA. And we have 1 and 0, and it's initially 0. And it can't do anything until the clock is 1. And when the clock is 1, it will follow D. But when the clock is 0, it has to stay where it is. So that's the gated D latch. And then the positive edge triggered, it can only change once each clock cycle. So what it does is it gets to the positive edge, and the positive edge is when the clock goes from 0 to 1. It gets to the positive edge, it looks at the value of D, and it says, okay, D is 1, so I'll become 1. And then it does not change again until it gets to the next positive clock edge. And then at the next positive clock edge, it looks at the value of D and says, okay, D is 0, so I'll become 0. And then it stays 0 until the next positive clock edge. At the next positive clock edge, it's still 0. And at the next positive clock edge, it's 1, so it goes back to 1. And then the negative edge triggered is similar, but it changes only on the negative edge. And so these are the negative edges when the clock goes from positive to negative. So it starts at 0 and it stays at 0 until it comes to a negative edge. At the first negative edge, D is 0, so it stays 0. At the next negative edge, it's still 0, so it stays 0. At the next negative edge, it's finally 1, so it'll change to 1. And then at the last negative edge, it's still 1, so it stays 1. Okay, and now let's look at a T flip-flop. I wonder what Copilot wants to tell me.
Never seen that.
That's because you can't put Copilot on the Office installed with the LSUs, and so I have the hardest time. It's like I bought it, and I have my own Microsoft account, but let's see if it wants to rewrite my page. Let's see what it says. Copilot's not that good. Huh, not bad. It came up with instructions for the to generate the Q output shown below. Plot the interesting. Okay, it didn't do a bad job. Okay, I take it back, Copilot. All right. So a T flip-flop. So a T flip-flop has the following truth table. It's different and it can be tricky. So I'm going to put well, you only have one input, and that's T, and T can be 0 or 1. And if T is 0, there's no change. But if T is 1, you toggle. And so that means whatever Q was before, it becomes the opposite. But this only changes on the clock edge, and it says it's a positive edge triggered. So our signal, our output, our Q, can only change on the positive clock edge. So I'll draw my vertical lines at the positive clock edges, because this is the only time that my output can change. Assume Q is initially 1. Okay, so Q is 1. We come here, we look at the value of T. T is 0. 0 means no change. So we stay at 1 until the next clock edge. At the next clock edge, T is 1. That means toggle. So we were at 1, we'll go down to 0. Get to the next clock edge, T is 0, that means no change. We stay there until the next clock edge. The next clock edge, T is 1, that means toggle, so we go back up to 1. All right, and then
Can I say that again real quick?
sure.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm using the force to see if I can get the Diet Coke to come to me. No, not happening. Okay. All right, so now let's look at, do I not have a JK? Okay, so we'll do a JK. So we're going to do this one. And I'm going to add a clock. So we're going to make this J and this K. And we're going to borrow a clock signal. I think that's a good clock signal. All right, and y'all want this to be a positive edge triggered or negative edge triggered JK flip-flop?
Negative.
All right. And this one, I really don't have any way to tell you because I have to look it up every time. It's just like an SR, except that the 1-1 is toggle. Except I can never remember which one is R and which one is S. So the 1-1 is toggle. The 0-0 is don't change. And I printed my cheat sheet to tell me when J is 1 and K is 0, that is 1. And when K is 1 and J is 0, that's 0. Is that what you happen to have in your notes? Okay, good. All right, and it's negative edge triggered, so we can only change on the negative edge of the clock. Looks like I probably ended up with a severely boring signal. I'm going to change it to make it a little more interesting. So I'm going to make my J signal that, and I'll make my R signal like that. Okay, so we start, let's say Q is 0, and I'll get to my first negative edge, and J is 1, and I see when J is 1, that my output is supposed to be 1. So I'll go up to 1. And then K is 1, and so when K is 1, my output is supposed to be 0, so I'll go down to 0. And then they're both 0, so it's no change. And then K is 0, and K0 is supposed to be 0, so that'll stay 0. And then let's pretend that at the next negative clock edge that they both just happen to be 1, just so we can practice with that. So when we get to the next negative clock edge, they're both 1, so it should toggle.
So if J and K are never simultaneously 1, this is just like an SR.
It is, yep. Okay, so any questions on latches or flip-flops?
Are there more kinds of these that we use in digital logic too?
No, I mean, you can make your own. Like you can say, okay, I want to make one that does such and such, but these are the common ones, and most of everything that you need to do can be done with these.